Hi there, welcome back to my YouTube channel Watch by Ashley, where we take a look at some of the new releases on the big streaming platforms and discuss whether or not they're worth the watch. Today we're going to be taking a closer look at Netflix's The Pale Blue Eye. So this film is an adaptation of a novel of the same title. That novel was written by Louis Bayard. And serving as director, producer, and writer of the screenplay, we have Scott Cooper. You might be familiar with some of Scott Cooper's other works, like Black Mass or Antlers. And starring in the film, we have Christian Bale. And actually, this is Christian Bale's third time working with Scott Cooper, as they did Hostels and Out of the Furnace together previously. And as you might be aware of, the title The Pale Blue Eye actually is in reference to Edgar Allan Poe's short story, The Telltale Heart. I'll leave a link to The Telltale Heart if you want to listen to it. So that was pretty interesting, especially because Edgar Allan Poe does make an appearance in this film as a character. Aside from The Simpsons featuring his work during like the Halloween specials, I wasn't really too familiar with Edgar Allan Poe, but I thought it was pretty cool that they used like this historical figure to kind of guide the plot, so that was really neat. The plot for this movie doesn't really focus on the story of The Telltale Heart, so just keep that in mind here. And this is a historical murder mystery. I thought it was really entertaining for 2 hours and 8 minutes, which is why I am so surprised to see that this film has not been very well received by the critics. I mean, if you take a look at Rotten Tomatoes, currently it has a score of 64%. On Metacritic, there's a score of 56%, and on IMDb, there's a score of 6.7. So a few facts about the movie. It went into production December 2021. It had a budget of about $72 million. Netflix bought the rights to produce this film for about $50 million. I always wonder how Netflix recoups their costs when they release these films on streaming platforms and don't give them full theatrical runs. That always boggles my mind, but that's what they spent here and it wasn't well received. I personally struggle to see why the critics are so torn on this film. I think it is incredibly suspenseful, it's well directed, and there is great performances all around. There is a great twist in this film, so I'm not going to spoil the ending for you. So in terms of the cast, Scott Cooper has a lot of support from some very familiar faces. Of course, as I mentioned, we have Christian Bale, who is playing Augustus Landor, our retired detective. You have joining him Harry Melling, who a lot of people are going to be familiar with as Dudley Dursley in the Harry Potter films. So he's here as Edgar Allan Poe, and he actually knocks it out of the park. He does a really good job of capturing the quirkiness of this very famous American poet. Then you also have Gillian Anderson in the film, who of course everyone is very familiar with from her portrayal of Scully from the X-Files. She plays the spouse of Dr. Daniel Marquise, who is very melodramatic and stuffy at the same time. So she's very entertaining here, of course. And then we have Toby Jones, who plays her husband, Dr. Daniel Marquise. I mean, ever since I saw him in Captain America, the Winter Soldier as Zola, like it's always nice to see him here and there. And we also have Timothy Spall, who plays Superintendent Thayer in this film. And of course, you'd be familiar with him as he played Wormtail in Harry Potter. And that's just a few of the actors here. There's actually a few more familiar faces that you'll see in the film. But I thought that was really interesting because it's almost like an ensemble cast here, because you're watching the film and you're like, oh, I know this person, I know that person. So another aspect of the film that I really liked. I know that there are some criticisms of Christian Bale's portrayal of Augustus Landor. Some people say that his performance is very lacking and muted, and it's not as extravagant as Hercule Poirot or Benoit Blanc and the other murder mysteries, but if you watch the film to its entirety, you kind of understand why he is the way he is. Like, he's just a man who wants to have peace in his life, and that's disturbed, especially when he's asked to investigate the crime that the film focuses on, especially when you think about the themes of this film. I think he does a fantastic job. The movie really does focus on consequences and kind of the ripple effect that it has on other people's lives. In terms of the plot, I'll give you a little bit of a plot summary, but I'm not going to spoil anything for you. I'll just give you kind of idea what the film is about. We start the film in the 1830s in West Point Military Academy in upstate New York. And there's a tragedy, as it appears that one of the cadets has hung himself, and at first it looks like a suicide, so they bring the body in for medical examining, and overnight while they're waiting for the medical examiner, someone has actually come in and taken the heart out of the corpse. So when Dr. Marquise comes, he does his autopsy, he rules that it's a suicide, but we have the transgression of the missing heart. So the higher-ups are very concerned and worried, so they enlist retired detective Augustus Landor. And Landor has a bit of a reputation that precedes himself. He's known to be an alcoholic, and he's kind of struggling right now because the rumor is that his daughters are away, and he's just wanting to be left alone and in peace. When the higher-ups in the military academy approach him and ask for his help, they make it seem like an offer that he can't refuse.
It's a fine day for a ride.
So they bring Landor back to the academy, and Landor looks at the body and he notices that one, there's a piece of paper stuck in the corpse's hand. Also, there's a bump on the back of the head of the corpse. So clearly there's foul play, and this gentleman was murdered even before someone took his heart. So something is completely off here. The other obvious issue here is that the medical examiner didn't notice these things.
Well, anyone could have missed that, Doctor.
It brings into question what this medical examiner was doing. How come he didn't notice them before? Was he covering up for somebody? Is he the murderer? Is there a bigger conspiracy going on at the academy? Landor is kind of left to look around the campus, kind of get a feel for things. He's definitely perplexed in terms of the relationship that Cadet Fry had with his colleagues. And one night he's at the pub and Edgar Allan Poe approaches him and he says to him, like, this whole matter of removing the heart, I think that the murderer must be a poet. And Landor's like, why would you think that? The two don't go hand in hand with each other. And Poe's just like, well, it takes a poet to be so dark and cruel and find the art and symmetry by removing the heart. And so Landor thinks that Poe is obviously a little bit weird and eccentric, but he can tell that he's well-intending. So Landor and Poe end up in a kind of relationship in the fact that Landor employs Poe to infiltrate the cadets in ways that he can't, because every time that Landor goes to ask any cadets questions, they obviously don't want to share any information with him. Versus Poe, he can kind of find out who Fry was friends with and kind of infiltrate their inner circle, which is exactly what he does. Poe ends up becoming friends with Artemis Marquise, who happens to be the son of Dr. Marquise, who did the medical examination. And Artemis is actually really popular. He has a bit of influence. People kind of take heed to his word. With Poe developing a friendship with him, Poe ends up getting invited to their house and socializes with him more and more. But things become a bit complicated when more bodies start appearing, and Poe actually ends up being one of the suspects. And so I'll leave it there. Like I said, I don't want to ruin the plot for you. I'll be honest, I have not read the novel The Pale Blue Eye. There is a pretty significant plot twist, and I thought it was really well executed, especially because if you're paying attention as an audience, you actually could pick up on some of the clues before the conclusions. One of the criticisms I heard of this film is that it doesn't know when to end, but to me, I kind of like the added layers that they put here, because there's some parts where I was guessing one thing and it ended up being something else, and I was kind of shocked. What I really did like is the way they depicted this eerie, creepy 1830s setting in Pennsylvania, because it really does make you feel like Sleepy Hollow. Like there's a scene where Landor and Poe are talking at night, and it honestly makes you feel like the Headless Horseman's going to come at any moment and just swoop in and attack them. This film really reminds me of Crimson Peak in terms of the set design, the costumes, and just the way they really capture that aesthetic. It really transports you to that era. Another thing that I thought they did really well here is, especially with the heart being removed from the corpse, of course everyone's going to think it's like an occult, there's going to be devil worshippers. And I find that period of time, like in the 1800s, when everyone is so hysterical over witchcraft and devil worship that in order to cleanse their society, they're willing to commit mass murder. I just find it so interesting that people could be so hysterical. Even in this film, you can kind of feel the air of anxiety here because people don't know what's happening, and these random murders are occurring in such a horrific way that people are really just nervous, right? So I thought Cooper did a fantastic job in terms of illustrating that. I think this is a solid B+ film, especially for the genre. It's definitely a murder mystery. No, it's not comedic, and it's not supposed to be. So if that's what you're looking for and you're scoring it based on that, then that's not really fair. I think Christian Bale did a fantastic job in his performance. Like I said, if you watch the film to the entirety, you get a better idea as to why. The direction is fantastic. Great cast, great performances. This is a really solid film in my opinion, and I do highly recommend it. So those are my thoughts in regards to The Pale Blue Eye. If you've seen the film and you liked it or didn't like it, please let me know. I'd love to have a conversation with you. What aspects worked for you or didn't work. But that's all I have for you today, so thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the content here, please consider giving me a like and subscribe, as it will help me in growing the channel, and I really do appreciate it.